So just a quick thing about the National Institute of Water Research. It's out of a legislation, and it was developed in 1964. I won't bore you with a lot of the details, and I'm certainly not going to read the legislation to you like I had to do in Washington, D.C. one time. But there's two parts to the program. There's a lot of you that, if you know anything about land-grant universities, you might think of it almost like that. And most of these NIWARs, individual institutes, are typically they're associated with the land-grant university of the state, but it doesn't have to be that way. So there's about 54 of them, so there's 50 states and the 4 territories. We are now part of the Department of the Interior under USGS, and we get about $92,000, a little over $92,000 from the federal government, which we match 2-to-1 with some state funding from Michigan State, and that's how it's set up. And there's the second part of the program is actually a competitive research program, typically called the 104G program, and anybody can apply for it. So anybody like involved here or over at Grand Valley State or anywhere can apply to it. The applications funnel through. If you're in Michigan, funnel through but basically all we do is upload them to grants.gov, and if you're selected for a full proposal and all that kind of stuff, you do that with USDS. So there's another part to the program, and those are up to $250,000 funding, but you have to match it 1-to-1 with non-federal dollars just to kind of get you all up to speed. There's right now there's a very small staff at IWR. I'll say IWR from now on, and we lead and support several projects. This staff is primarily technical staff, and we support those projects. Or in case of this person here, Jeremiah, he's the assistant director, and he actually leads several of the projects. But we work with right now about 12 faculty, and one of my kind of goals in the next few years is to actually reach out, and part of going and talking with Alan is to reach out across the state and get more faculty engaged. When I was at, I keep saying, well, when I was at University of Maine, but when I was at University of Maine, we had across the state of Maine about 45 faculty as part of our research, our water research group there. And so I think it's vital to the program and great idea generation if you branch out a little bit. So that's what we're going to try to do. Currently, we do some of the educational outreach. I'll talk about research in just a minute. Types of programs. So we do a lot of kind of educational types things for both K through 12 and older students, I'll say. And then we have a certificate program through the Maine Water Environment Association, so their members can actually come and take modules about watersheds, learn a little bit about watersheds, and get our certificate after they finish those modules and so forth. We developed some manuals through the Agriculture Extension Service, MSU Extension Service. They have a little, other than these modules, have some online stuff and that kind of thing. And one of our faculty in the institute does a lot with the Grandparents University. If you might know someone, you might know about that in Michigan State. Just quick, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the details, but we're, as I mentioned, we get $92,000 from the federal government. That's matched with state funding. That's sort of operating money. We bring in, this is a little bit old chart, we bring in about $1.5 million a year of external funding, and that's from state agencies and federal agencies. You'll see that in just a minute as I talk through some of that stuff. We have a lot of students involved in our projects, both graduate and undergraduate students. Al will talk about that. And we have been focused probably in the last 10 to 12 years, been focused a lot on conservation practices of both agriculture and non-agriculture across the state, trying to help them conserve water. So I just want to tell you a little quickly to run through some past projects, and some of these you might know about, and some of them you may know more about than I do. So one of the things that comes out, that one of the first ones is the Great Lakes Watershed Management system. There's a link to it. Basically, it tries to estimate. It's a modeling program that estimates, uses an interface to work with farmers out in the field on like iPads or whatnot, computers, and trying to estimate using some different modeling techniques, best management practice for agricultural practices, and then pay for those practices. And you'll see that as a sort of common theme in some of our projects that we've been working on, to try to reduce loading into the lakes and streams. So, basically what it does is it uses SWOT type models, looks at the 30 best practices once they do a GIS of the farm, tells the farmer, here's the top 5 or whatever that would help you the best. Gives you based on information that we have from the USDA, gives them a payout process, and estimates water erosion, runoff, and so forth like that. Sensitive Areas Identification System is sort of a takeoff of Watershed Management Program. It was funded by our Michigan Natural Resource Conservation Service. And basically the farmer can, I'll just advance one slide, you can look at these, you can digitize your farm, look at the areas in red are the sensitive areas around your farm that are might see more runoff or that kind of thing. And so the farmer can actually do this at home. The data are stored. We can look at that. We can have an extension person come and talk with them if they need that type of help. But the idea is to get farmers particularly, and I grew up on a farm. I had a father who basically did, this side story, farmer who did things like his father did, didn't matter what the extension person said. And that's why I was a farmer, because I didn't want to do things like my father did. But it gives them a chance to, trying to get this, like they don't have to go to meetings or certain places like this to get the information. They can actually do it with their iPads at home, and hopefully it encourages them to adopt some of those practices. And so again, GIS systems, there are a lot of different map layers. We can lay all the information in those maps and so forth. And we can identify areas that might be an issue. The models identify those areas that might be an issue. That red circle is the area that might be an issue. And that's actually what happened, runoff system. So the model was actually a pretty good predictor of what was going to happen in that particular farmer's area. And so we can kind of say, hey, we think that this is going to happen to you. Let's investigate and look at some practices that might cause that to decrease, that issue. This is something that has really took off. They just implemented this about the time I took over, right before I took over the center, and that was the Great Lakes Community Network. And it's really basically a GUI interface to a database, and different communities can put in things that they're doing in their community to capture rain, any kinds of things like that. Best management practices, and they share them throughout the community. And there's actually, this slide is a little bit old, but there's actually about 500 member organizations. That means that's sort of member communities, that's not individuals necessarily. On that, and it's used by people in Michigan, but also in the bordering states and provinces of Canada. And it was funded by the Great Lakes Protection Fund. And it's actually going to be, we are developing based on some input from DEQ and other people, maybe a newer version of this to incorporate other information so that the state can look at some of that information. It'll be private information, public information. We can look at that state, and the state can look at how to best manage their money in terms of some of these practices they might want to implement. And probably I'll end with these past ones with the water withdrawal assessment tool. And probably many of you know a lot more about this, and I know that my friend Al does probably more than he wants to know about it. But this is the tool that was developed, I think, about 15 years ago as part of the IWR MSU at the request of DEQ here in Michigan, and looking at withdrawal assessments and determining. So a farmer says, hey, I want to drop a well so I can use irrigation, and so the DEQ gets that application in, and they use this tool to assess the impacts on that area around where that well is going to be dropped and so forth. And you might know, and many of you in this area of the state might know, that we were involved with the Michigan State Legislature. There was a legislator from Southwest Michigan who brought up a new version of the bill, and we had to work with them last spring and through the summer to look at how to incorporate some of the changes that they would like in that tool. But the idea is the tool itself. The tool takes some input from DEQ, and the farmer can use it too. The farmer can use it to test it out as well, and then makes a recommendation on what type of what class of withdrawal it will be, and goes from there. DEQ. The issue seemed to be in the legislature, as I read it, and I sort of think of my perspective as outside looking in, happened to be that the DEQ was taking too long to make those decisions, and so we tried to look at how we could improve the tool to make that help to make those decisions a lot faster. And one that we've been working on with some people both in animal science, but also in biosystems engineering, where I'm chair, and the Ag Bio Research Group, is this tool called EnviroImpact. It's basically to look at forecasting runoff of manure applications, and it's more of a nutrient management system. So again, sort of a GUI interface to that. This is just kind of giving you some data. There's a lot of manure that's used as a nutrient application in farming. And look, here's just areas of livestock density and so forth. If you kind of look at this, highlighted this one, over about 9,000 farms, about 750,000 acres is where manure is applied. And we all know, as my father would say, we do it when it's good for us, not necessarily when it's good weather, but we're trying to use this tool to help farmers and regulators to understand when the best time to apply that manure, so you won't get the runoff and you won't get the nutrients into the streams and so forth. So we, over the years, and I think don't quote me on this one, I think the Institute at Michigan State was incorporated in the late 60s. And so for a few years now, we've been doing kind of different things that have, in some cases, are very high visibility issues, like the water withdrawal assessment, as an example, or the work with Lake Erie down in Toledo. And I wasn't in this area then, but everybody in here in this room probably knows a lot about that. And trying to work with people to try and make those systems better. And that's kind of what been our focus for the last, say, 15, 20 years. One of the things that Jeremiah Asher is doing is actually looking at trying to look, you have trial drain systems, as you all know, but trying to look at treating phosphorus out of that using building a wetland. And so the idea is to actually build a wetland adjacent to where the runoff would be, and then to look at various types of plants and how you might actually design this wetland to uptake the phosphorus and to manage the phosphorus in a different way than you've been able to do before. So rather than just have a standard buffer strip, actually design a wetland to do some of these things. So I just want to go, those are some past projects that I suppose that this one is an ongoing project. We took a wetland in this fall. We haven't taken data quite yet. The wetland got finished, I think, right before Thanksgiving. So we'll take our first data on that wetland in the spring. I'll run through them very quickly, just to kind of show you. And the theme that you'll see through these is a lot of we're working with Natural Resources Conservation Service and EPA as well to look at ways to help farmers increase their conservation practices. And I've been out of agriculture, farming, and that kind of stuff from the late 70s until I moved back to Michigan State. And I went to a farm field day down in southeast Michigan, and I was surprised when I sat down on a bale of hay and heard a farmer talking about this new technology called cover crops. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because I know the farming mentality, because they do things because of the way the previous generation did it, because they knew they worked and they knew how much it cost and stuff like that. But they were talking about cover crops when I was in grade school in North Carolina, and I'm sure they were at Michigan. So we're trying. You'll see that the theme is looking at these different conservation practices. So we're this RCPP is basically a pay for performance type tool, looking at different conservation practices. This one is looking at a record keeping program that we sort of build a database in with our modeling tool, so we can capture the data, give the data back to the farmer. We also have a copy of it for NRCS and so forth. The Earth Family Foundation has funded us a little bit to look at, looking at different methods of, should I say, different types of tile drain systems, and looking at that. And we're working with Adrian College, using some of their students to do some of the data collection and also the sample analysis as well. The Clinton River Central Project is one that we just started really in December. Office of Great Lakes gave us some funding for this, and we've had a couple private donors to do that type of funding. And the private donor wanted us to involve some of the K through 12 students in the Detroit area, greater Detroit area, to do some of this. And so we're building some sensors in my engineering lab at Michigan State, very basic water level sensors that high school and junior high school kids can build. So it kind of gets them involved in that process, and then they get to deploy them out in the waterways and we can look at basic hydrology effects and E. coli. We've been sampling E. coli and stuff like that. I'll kind of go here and go back up. We're looking at edge of field research similar to that one I mentioned a minute ago about tile drains. We have some money from a company, AgriLiquid, and also some funding from INDARD to look at water quality in a till versus a no-till planting operation in just north of campus, about an hour or so. And then we're working with this. This is the linkage I told you about the clean community. So this is an offshoot of that, if you will, looking at a way to engage the community to determine what types of things that the community thinks makes their community a thriving, vibrant community, and trying to track that information on a dashboard, and then it helps be able to help the state to look at how they might put funding in various townships across the state. And I just wanted to quickly, I know Al's going to talk about it, but Michigan State, obviously PFAS is coming up, and it was sort of found in Michigan first. So MSU Extension has been putting together a working group that started late last fall or maybe mid-fall, and they put together, you can kind of see this frequently asked questions area where homeowners, private citizens come and read stuff, and if they have a question, they can submit it, and a person will get back to them on what they think they should do. And then we have a research group that some of the folks from Hannah's Water Research Center is involved with as well. And just looking at they're going to have a final report probably in the first part of May, right after the semester's over, but looking at the various areas that they feel like we need to be involved in research, where those areas might get funding in addition to the campus, looking at the health effects of children, older folks, older folks like me, people like you that are in the middle times there, but looking at all kinds of different things that we might broadly across the state start looking at for terms of research. Where I hope to take the IWR in the future is, again, make it a household name, if you will, because we set, one of the things I said to them when they asked me to take it over is, you set set in the largest non-saltwater body of water in the world, and I had to Google what IWR was. So, I'd like to take it a little more broadly. I've done a lot of work internationally, so I'd like to be doing some of those kind of things, branching out. But we also want to, we started doing some work with University of Michigan. I hate to say that, but we beat them in basketball, so I should say. We started to do some work there. We'll be hopefully doing a lot more with Al and his group there. We've already started looking at some work in China and Southeast Asia, and also some work with one of my colleagues that is in Australia as well. So I think with that's where I'll stop. You can get to the IWR website, sort of the middle one there, and if you need to contact me, there's my email, and Melanie, we're going to make our slides available to you. So I'll stop there and ask Al if you'll come up, and I'll try to get your slides
Well, I think one of the things that you're going to see is how IWR and AWRI complement each other with respect to the kind of research that we do, where Darrell's shop has a lot of the computational expertise, the modeling, the graphical user interfaces, and we focus more on the ground research, sampling, analysis, and so there's a lot of opportunity there for collaboration around that. And so that's a great way of kind of intersecting things. I will say this, if you Google AWRI, the first thing that comes up is the Australian Wine Research Institute.
Oh, that's a good place to go.
Yeah, so the idea is to get past that and get to us. Our mission is to integrate research, education, and outreach to enhance and preserve our freshwater resources. We take that integration very seriously. We want to make sure that the research we do, while very robust and top-notch, is put in the hands of our decision makers and elected officials in a way that they can understand and digest it. So that's why we have an information services center to provide that information in a way that they can understand that. We started off on the main campus. It was formed in 1986. In 2001, we moved to Muskegon, and we are located on Muskegon Lake, on the shoreline of the lake. So it's a great location for us. The community has been incredibly supportive. In fact, when they built our first building, the Lake Michigan Center was the largest capital campaign that Muskegon had done to that point, which has showed you how interested they were in bringing us to the lakeshore to kind of change the image of Muskegon from a foundry-based economy to something that's more knowledge-based. Still not sure what knowledge-based economy means, but it sounds good and it's attractive to the Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to show this slide simply, particularly for MSU, because at our opening of the Lake Michigan Center, we had one of our governors and former president of MSU, whose name will go unnoticed. Today, we have 3 different buildings. We sit on this 2.5 acre site. We have the original building, the Lake Michigan, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. The Lake Michigan Center. We built a field station about 5 years ago, and then we have these tanks inside to do kinds of experiments in these mesocosms. And then we also have a boat storage building. In terms of our resources, we have 2 main research vessels. We have the Jackson, which is berthed in Muskegon at 65 feet long, 14-foot beam. It has 8 berths on it. And then we have the Angus, which is berthed in Grand Haven. We also have an electrofishing boat, and we have a number of John boats. So we spend a lot of time on the water with a fleet of 9 vessels. We have an external science advisory board. Some of you may know these people. Harvey Bootsma from the University of Wisconsin, Carol Johnston from South Dakota State, Gary Lamberti from Notre Dame, and Don Scavia, formerly of University of Michigan, now retired. I just have a short video clip to give you a sense of what happens on the vessels in the Institute. So if you can bear with me on this.
Robert B. Annis Water Resources Institute.
So you get a sense here, not only are the vessels used for research, but they're also used heavily for educational purposes to give hands-on learning experiences to students throughout the region. Our service area stretches as far south as St. Joe, as far north as Traverse City, and as far east as East Lansing. And since these vessels have been in operation, putting these students on the boats, we put over 180,000 students on these vessels. giving them a hands-on learning experience. We have the labs on board. They go out, they sample the water, they sample the sediment, then they go in and do the analyses. It's an incredible program. We pay for 85% of the cost to the school systems. It's subsidized by our endowment funds. So the only real cost to the school is fuel to get to our vessels to do that. And they are heavily booked. I mean, they're filled up 6 months in advance for these cruises. We don't have an undergraduate degree at AWRI. We have a graduate program where we bring in summer interns throughout the summer, about 10 to 12 each year, to work with the faculty hands-on different programs and different research projects. Our master's degree is a master's degree in biology with an emphasis on water resources. Currently we have about 15 to 20 master's programs. We don't have a PhD program. It's something that our Board of Trustees is not interested in. But it creates a tremendous opportunity here for student exchanges for undergraduates, masters, and PhD level students between MSU and GVSU. And so we really want to explore that opportunity as well. Starting this next fall, in fall of 2019, we're going to start a professional science master's in water policy as well, because there's a tremendous demand around water policy issues. And so that creates opportunities with MSU as well. I kind of want to transition now. I'm not going to take you through all the projects we're doing at AWRI. You can easily go on our website once you get past the Wine Institute, and you can look at all of those. But what I want to talk to you about is, in more broader fashion, some of the problems facing the Great Lakes and the work that we're doing to try and solve those problems. Like AWRI is very solution-based, and we really do want to try and deal with those issues in a way that's pragmatic, practical, and is going to have real-world application. So about 10 years ago, about 20 scientists from the Great Lakes got together at U of M, and we just developed what all the major stressors facing the Great Lakes. We also did an expert elicitation, about 300 people around the Great Lakes, decision makers, policy folks, and scientists. And we came up with a list of 54 stressors, and we put them into 8 different buckets, which you see here. And you could probably talk to different scientists and get different responses as to what's most significant. But these were our list of 8. And the top is runoff from land, which Darrell talked about, leading to harmful algal blooms. Toxic chemicals in the middle top, which is our persistent organics that are our legacy problems. Upper right, invasive species, climate change, water withdrawals, both from groundwater and from surface water, coastal development, aquatic habitat loss, and overfishing pressure. And I'm going to talk very briefly about the 3 that are circled in red, and also mention at the end some of the emerging issues that we're facing here in the Great Lakes. Things like groundwater extraction, PFAS, some of those issues that are really critical that we're dealing with as time goes on. When we talk about runoff from land, now 40 years ago, the major problems for pollution were point sources coming out of pipes. The Federal Clean Water Act took care of that. Now, instead of 80% of our pollution coming from pipes, it comes from the land. It's more insidious. It's harder to solve because you don't have it coming out of a specific point. But we're trying to deal with these issues in a very real way, and how the best management practices that Darrell alluded to is exactly what those things involve. And so otherwise, if you don't, you end up with these harmful algal blooms. This is Lake Erie, but similar to Lake Makatawa. The reason, one of the ironies in Makatawa, is that we do get blooms every summer. We don't get them as bad as they should be, given the pollution and the phosphorus levels in the lake, is because there's so much sediment. There's simply not enough light getting into the lake water to allow the algae to photosynthesize and bloom. So even though we're trying to reduce the amount of sediment load into the lake, we recognize once we're successful in doing that, we're going to actually have worse algal blooms for a short period of time until then we solve the phosphorus problem. One of the major problems from the harmful algal blooms is this toxin called microcystin. It's a hepatotoxin, it's a tumor promoter. EPA is developing standards right now, but we use the World Health Organization standards as a proxy. If your water supply is used for drinking water, not Makatawa, but Lake Erie, the standard is 1 microgram per liter, or 1 part per billion. If it's recreational, like Lake Makatawa, your limit is 20, so you want to be below that. Obviously, you want to be as low as possible. Just to show you some data, Mona Lake, which is a lake north of us in Norton Shores, during blooms a couple of years ago was at 350. That's a recreational water supply, so it should be 20. That's 17 times above the standard. We sampled Lake Mac last summer, and we were less than 1. So that's the good news. Again, remember, you don't get many blooms in Lake Makatawa because there isn't enough light for the algae to bloom. We'll continue monitoring that, so when you start getting worse blooms, which is actually an indication of the watershed improving, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but but it really is the case. We'll see whether the microsystem levels start to pop up at that point. But right now, things are good. What's the solution? Well, wetland restoration. We're doing that in the Macatawa watershed right now. Whether it's on, we're not doing it around the drainage ditches like Darrell's doing over on the east side of the state, because the farmers here don't want to take their land out of production. And a wetland, it takes a lot of land. So instead, what we're doing right now, how many of you live in the Macatawa watershed? Just out of curiosity. So quite a few of you. So we're working with Joe Dykehouse, a major farmer in the watershed, to put in slag filters. We're taking slag and we're putting in these big beds of slag underground, so it's not taking any land out of production. And we're routing the tile drainage through these slag filters, which is filled with iron. The iron absorbs the phosphorus, and then we're measuring how much phosphorus comes out on the back end. This is being funded by MDARD. The real question that MDARD is concerned with, we know the iron's going to absorb the phosphorus. I mean, the chemistry is pretty clear cut. The problem is, will the slag end up leaching metals, heavy metals? That might be a problem for water quality. So that's what we're analyzing right now. Some other solutions, again, feeding on exactly what Darrell was talking about, winter cover crops. This was something that was not done in this watershed, amazingly. You'd think this would be fairly intuitive. So now, whether it's alfalfa or whatever it might be putting in for the cover crops, the farmers want to put the manure in when it's convenient for them, but it doesn't make sense here in Michigan when we have frozen fields in the winter to apply the manure at that time, because it's just going to run off and it's not going to get absorbed into the field. Riparian buffer strips and these novel stripping technologies like the slag beds. And then green infrastructure, because it's not just the agricultural area that's contributing this runoff, it's also the urban area. Obviously, the more urban areas we have, the more impervious surface we have, the less percolation, the more runoff, and it's carrying nutrients and metals with it. And so we want to retain the original hydrology, keep the water in place as much as possible. And you'll see, as you go around, whether it's Windmill Island or all over through the downtown area, we're seeing more and more of these pervious surfaces being put in as part of this Project Clarity to try and keep the nutrients and the sediment out of Lake Macatawa. And then finally, when nothing else works, you might be able to go into the lake and add something like aluminum sulfate, alum, in order to strip the phosphorus out and keep it in the sediment, or you can dredge the sediment. Now that's going to be outrageously expensive for Macatawa, and we don't want to do the inactivation yet in Macatawa if we have to, because first we want to deal with the watershed. You want to deal with the external loading first before you go in, because if we start spending money on internal loading, as long as new phosphorus keeps coming into the system, you're not going to solve the problem, right? And so this is somewhere down the line, if in fact the work we're doing in the watershed doesn't solve the problem, then we'll start looking at engineering solutions. Invasive species, the Great Lakes are the poster child for this. We've had over 180. It's changing the food webs, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it's economically, it's very costly. This is just for the salties. We get on average 6 to 10 salties that come into the Great Lakes a year. That's it, just 6 to 10 now. What's happening is mostly Lakers. They're going within the Great Lakes themselves from one port to another. But these salties have to stop mid-ocean, do ballast exchange. It's costing them about $140 million a year. So that's $25 million a ship. Now everybody knows about the zebra mussels being a problem. The reality is zebra mussels are no longer an issue in Lake Michigan. If you look at the time change over here on the far left, when they came in the late 80s and the early 90s, densities, the black densities is about 10,000 per meter squared. By 2010, they're not in Lake Michigan at all. They've been replaced by their more aggressive, larger cousins, the quagga mussels, which have now pretty much filled in all of Lake Michigan. Estimates, because there's no way you're going to count these at this point, but the estimates for quagga mussels in Lake Michigan, 300 trillion. So the T, trillion, right? They are literally, because these are filter feeders, they are literally sucking the bioenergetic life out of the lake. And what's happening now is what used to be the prey at the bottom of the lake, this scud or amphipod called AWRI, which was quite dense back in 94, 95, before the mussels came in, has just one little population on a reef off of Milwaukee. It's basically been replaced by these quagga mussels. And if you're a prey fish and you're looking for benthic feeding, and you don't have this nice nutrient-rich, lipid-rich scud anymore, instead you have a dreissenid mussel, a small mussel with a little bit of meat, you're going to have difficulty getting the amount of energy that you need to survive. And what we've seen is some of the key prey fish, like alewives, like bloaters, have been declining and declining in density over time. Now, if you're a salmon or a lake trout and you want to eat and you're focused on these prey fish, you're going to have difficulty. And in fact, the only way that our salmon population has been retained over the last 10 years is we're feeding off of the salmon that moved in from Lake Huron, because the Alewife population crashed there first. And so we're basically living off of natural capital, and that's no way to sustain a fishery. So we've reduced the number of plantings of salmon around the lake. All the steelhead associations got together from the 4 Great Lakes states on Lake Michigan, and they reduced plantings by 40% in the hope to build back up the alewife and bloater population to have enough food for the salmon into the future. Does that make sense? Okay, so what are the solutions? Well, we need a clear policy, and we're working on this right now. The trouble is so many different federal agencies are involved with invasive species legislation, whether it's Fish and Wildlife, which is the Army Corps of Engineers, I can go on, that coming up with a coherent policy has been very, very difficult. Everybody wants to defend their turf. What a shock. And so we need early detection, monitoring. We're working on environmental DNA as one of the ways to do that. Has everybody heard of eDNA? Is that Darren? Anybody want me to talk about it or just keep going? So eDNA, basically, in that case, you sample the water, all right? And in the water, you're looking for detection of certain genes that are specific to species. So we're doing this for Asian carp right now. Because Asian carp, the 4 species of Asian carp have very distinct markers. So we can take the water samples and we can look for those markers in the genetics and the DNA to see whether they might be there or not. And so this is a much faster way to do this, and it's a good way to monitor it. It's a screening tool. It's not an absolute, but it's a screening tool. And then working on chemicals, in this case Zequinox, which I don't think you can see right here, which is specific for dreissynid mussels, zebra and quagga mussels. The trouble is it has to be ingested by the mussel to kill them off. And we've got 300 trillion mussels. There's not enough Zequinox in the world that you could apply that's going to work that way. And then finally, loss of habitat. We've lost 90% of the coastal wetlands in the Great Lakes since Europeans came in to Michigan. This is Beaver Island, and just a beautiful wetland in St. James Bay that we sample on a regular basis. In Muskegon Lake, which used to be covered by wetlands all around the shoreline, just like Macatawa. In fact, the whole watershed was wetlands in Macatawa, but it's drained for agriculture. In this case, we drained it and filled it in order to build lumber mills back in the 1800s. We had 47 active sawmills on Muskegon Lake, and then those were replaced by foundries and factories. So and you can see, how things changed over time, and Macatawa is no different in many respects. 16% of the lake's open water has been filled in over time since the 1800s. So all that were pristine wetlands that have been in place. That habitat, that critical habitat for fish and wildlife, that also these wetlands we call them the kidneys of the ecosystem because they filter out nutrients and sediments. All have been lost and replaced by this hardened material. So the idea is now to restore this area, take out some of this material, soften the shoreline. So give you an example of what the shoreline used to look like on Muskegon Lake and what we replaced it with in order to restore the natural function of the ecosystem. So the solutions are ecosystem restoration and recognizing the value of what we call blue economy, where our economy is based around water. We did an inventory, John Austin and I did an inventory about 5 years ago about what the value of water was to the state of Michigan. 1 in 5 jobs in the state is tied to water. 1 in 5 jobs. Over $60 billion in our economy is focused around water in the state. And that's without even trying to use water. That's just what's happening de facto as we currently exist. Can you imagine if we actually tried to use this as an accelerant to build our economy? And I would say that in Muskegon, which is a relatively unique situation, not only have we shown the value of it, for every dollar spent on restoration, we get a 6.6 to 1 return on that investment. It's a really significant investment, mostly in terms of real estate value, improving as a function of improving the water quality of the lake. But more important than that, and you can't put a price tag on this, is the pride in the community that's been restored, where now the lake is no longer used as a sewer, but it's actually a natural resource. And so just seeing that kind of change in the attitude of the people that I've been there 18 years, it's really an amazing transition. So just a couple of emerging issues. Darrell set the stage for this in terms of groundwater. Here in this county, in Ottawa County, we are facing a crisis In the middle part of the state, where Robinson Township, Blendon, Olive, and Allendale Townships all come together, we have seen the groundwater, the static water level in the wells drop 40 feet over the last 50 years. 40 feet. So if you're a farmer and you're pulling from your well in this area, originally pulling from the glacial till, nice yielding, high yielding groundwater, now you're running out of water and your wells are going deeper and deeper. And you're going to start getting into the marshal, the bedrock aquifer. And not only now is it harder to pull from that, but now you're sitting in an aquifer that used to be salt water. It was an ancient seabed. And so what's going to happen in terms of your water quality? It's going to go up. Chloride levels, exactly. And the chloride levels have, the wells that have above 250 milligrams per liter, which is the state threshold, have doubled. That have now exceeded that threshold. Now, if you're drinking the water, it goes to 250 to 500. You may not taste much. You're not going to really taste much of a difference. But if you're a farmer and you're irrigating blueberries, you're screwed, right? So this is a significant problem that Ottawa County is dealing with right now. I serve on the executive management team trying to figure out what are the solutions for us. But it's not just Ottawa County. It's on the east side of the state too. For those not familiar with the geology of the state of Michigan, it's a series of nested bowls, the aquifers. So right down the middle, you have this ancient glacial till, pretty deep, maybe down to 100 feet, and it yields good water, really high quality water. But towards the edges, you start getting towards bedrock. So whether you're on Lake Huron, Lake Erie, or Lake Michigan, it doesn't take long before you penetrate down through the glacial till and you're into the Marshall Aquifer, yielding these high chloride levels. And so there's a problem here. And Ottawa County probably has the most complex geology of any county in the state. So the solutions are to conserve water. Do you know how hard it is to convince people in the state of Michigan to conserve water? Particularly if you're in a county that borders a Great Lake, it's like you're screwed. It ain't going to happen. I don't care what kind of educational practices you apply, it's just not going to happen because people can't be convinced that there's a water problem. So the next solution is to extend the water mains where feasible, but that's expensive. You're talking about hookups here that can cost $20,000 per house to extend these mains. People get a freak at those kind of things. Xeriscaping, instead of having turf, plant vegetation that doesn't have a high water demand. So these are the kind of things that we're looking at right now and trying to convince people to change their practices. Technical solutions are easy. Changing human behavior is really, really hard. And then, again, trying to put in rain barrels and cisterns and things like that. Again, it's a really tough thing to do. For those of you who have had the ability, the pleasure of visiting Bermuda, you know that there's no surface water in Bermuda. So they have to import all their water, and then they capture their rain in cisterns. And so when water supplies get low, they say shower with a friend. So I hope that we have to go to that level too. So just an overview of these threats to the Great Lakes. We know they're diverse. There isn't just one problem that needs to be addressed, so that makes the solutions very difficult because you have to have a multidisciplinary approach. They change in importance over time. 30, 40 years ago, we were focused on zebra mussels and PCBs. Now we're focused on PFAS and groundwater depletion. And they differ by location. The problems in Duluth are very different than the problems in Toledo. Again, making it very difficult. So there are multiple stressors at work. We need to be focused on their relative strength changing from place to place and over time in order to figure out the best strategy for dealing with these issues. And you have to be nimble. That's the reality. New things pop up, and we need to be able to adapt to that. And that's, again, one of the advantages of having a collaboration with MSU and the resources that are at an incredibly large land grant institution like MSU, being able to rely on those, and then us having access to the Great Lakes, and also having the expertise that we have at AWRI as well. So it lends itself well for this collaboration. So with that, I just want to thank you again. That's our website. And this kind of brings together the integration that I talked about at the very beginning. Graduate students for educational training, holding a lake sturgeon, an iconic threatened species here in the Great Lakes that we're interested in conserving. And in the background, the Milwaukee Clipper, which is now birthed in Muskegon Lake as a former sign of the commerce of the Great Lakes, but now as a museum. And by having the water quality, the restoration of the habitat in Muskegon Lake, we bring people to this area to do this kind of ecotourism that we want to focus on blue economy around this entire state. So with that, I have some PFAS stuff, but I'm not going to bore you with that. So for Darrell and I, if you have any questions,
Sort of a new issue.
it is a new issue. It's really critical in the middle part of the county. So I think that's where we need to focus our attention. And in fact, we just denied a housing development in Allendale Township. It was ridiculous. The guy wanted to put in wells in that area, and he was 200 feet from a water main. And we said, if you want this development, you've got to do the water main. And he said no. So it was denied. So I think it's going to take for the township officials to have some real backbone saying no to some of these housing developments, because obviously that's a tax base that they're losing. But in the long run, it's better for the county to do it in a sustainable fashion. Right now, groundwater supply in this county is not sustainable. That's the reality. It's a tough reality for people to recognize.
And that's threatening the blueberry industry?
Well, depending on where you are, I mean, for the farmers, it has the potential. Now, two different things here. One is water quantity and one is water quality. They're interrelated, of course. But when you're talking about management strategies, you're going to have to take two different directions for solving that problem. The orchards are going to be at risk once the chloride levels get too high. So it's serious. No doubt about it.
That fluoride impacted for drinking water?
Like I said, the chloride needs to get above about 1,000 milligrams per liter before you start really detecting a taste. 1 part per thousand. We really notice that. So, and you can put a filter right on your home drinking water on your faucets to deal with that. You can't do that if you're irrigating, large water demand for that. It's not feasible.
You talk about extending water mains. Water, presumably for city water, is all coming out of the lakes, right?
Well, depending on where you are, but yes, for Ottawa County, it's Lake Michigan.
Are there implications too if we were to double the number of homes that are on lake water? Is that a problem?
No. The amount that you're pulling is so infinitesimal compared to the total volume of Lake Michigan. It's ridiculous. When I didn't get into water levels, which is usually when I'm talking to lakeshore owners, water levels become the major issue, whether they're too high or too low. Somebody's always mad, right? One way or the other. You're doing your job well, and everyone's equally pissed off at you. So it's a great way for job satisfaction. But people usually think the diversion out to the Chicago River is a major loss of water from Lake Michigan. And again, it's true, it's a couple of percent. Most of the water loss of Lake Michigan is evaporation. In fact, it's the major loss. And I like to use this little fun fact. What month of the year do you think we lose the most water from evaporation off Lake Michigan? It is winter. Most people say July or August, but in fact, November and December are, because the ice hasn't formed yet, and you get these cold fronts coming off of Canada, and the water still has some latent heat in it, and so you get the most evaporation at that time. So, and with the last few years where we've had, other than the polar vortex, in general, the ice cover has been reduced compared to us historically. We've had more evaporation. Now, the last couple of years, we've had more ice cover. We've had a lot more precipitation. So water levels, that's why they're up right now. They're about 12 inches above, 11 to 12 inches above the long-term mean, but still 7 to 8 inches below the highest maximum levels that we've had. So there's a lot of homeowners that are very, very concerned, and they're worried because of potential real estate loss, but we're nowhere near where we were in 1986.
So the fluoride really sounds like it's an issue with the wells, not so much runoff from road salt and stuff like that. I guess that would be minimal compared to what they're pulling up from the groundwater.
Yeah, that's a great question. So on a national level, road salt is a real problem into our aquifers. It's embedded into that, and it has a long residency time. So in the northeast United States and over in the mid-Atlantic states, it's a major, major problem. In Ottawa County, MSU did that modeling, and they found that Dr. Lee found that it actually, the road salt runoff, other than very, very localized areas, but on a countywide basis, is not a problem compared to the deep aquifer, the Marshall. That's a great question.
Not to pick on that guy, but when we were talking about a development where they were going to sink individual wells, wouldn't those wells have had to be very deep?
Yeah, they probably would have. I don't remember exactly what they had. They did a couple of bore tests, but I don't remember exactly where they.
The cost of those wells are cheaper than just extending the main?
Because if they extended the main, then the developer would have had to absorb that cost. And you don't want to do that.
Whose money is it?
Yeah, well, let's see. Yeah, ultimately, It's a question for macroeconomics. As I also tell people, I tell my students, every environmental problem you face ultimately is an economic problem, and you need to understand macro and microeconomics if you're going to solve problems.
Origin, primary origin.
Well, it depends. It varies. Now, in many cases, for the ones that are coming through ballast water, they came from the Ponto-Caspian region of Europe, right, and they came over that way. Now, the number one source of new invasive species, because they've really dealt very strongly with the ballast water exchange, the number one vector for invasive species is the live trade business. Aquarium business, going through the internet and getting plants, getting fish, you can get them from China. So the live trade is the number one thing, is not well regulated at all. So they're starting to look into that too. But then again, you have USDA, you have Fish and Wildlife, you have Commerce, all trying to deal with this, and there's no coherent policy. It's insane. I mean, I can stand here and talk about it, Darrell can as well, about how ridiculous this is, but we can't get the people together to focus on this. You know, probably 3 or 4 years ago, Congressman Huizinga, he's the congressman here too, right? Yeah. Brought some of all the people together at the Institute, the AWRI, and talked about how we can have a coherent policy around invasive species. And, you know, I'm sitting there listening to these various representatives of the federal agencies, and I'm sitting, you know, they are all defending their own turf, and they're not thinking about what's for the better good. And I know I sound incredibly naive, right? But when you're sitting there listening to these people, you just want to shake them and go, come on. You know, while you're arguing about this stuff, we've got these species that are destroying our environment. Can you not get your freaking act together? So it's very fun, as you can tell. It's not very fun. Well, I introduced drink the water. There's all this annex in the water. You know. So.
Let's thank our speakers today. And